Something quiet has been happening beneath the surface of modern dating, and most men won't notice it until it's already cost them years. It doesn't announce itself. There's no single moment of collapse, no dramatic confrontation, no clear line in the sand. Instead, it begins with a pattern so subtle that by the time a man realizes he's caught in it, he's already surrendered the one thing that made him valuable in the first place. You can see it in the way certain men move through the world now. There's a heaviness to them, a kind of emotional exhaustion that settles into their shoulders and never quite leaves. They show up to work, meet their obligations, scroll through their phones late at night, looking at women they'll never approach, and somewhere deep inside, they know something fundamental has shifted. They're present, but not really here. They're participating, but not really playing. And if you ask them directly what changed, most of them couldn't tell you. They'd say they're just tired, or busy, or that dating isn't what it used to be. But that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is this. These men have made themselves familiar, not through any single catastrophic decision, but through 1,000 small acts of availability, 1,000 moments of eagerness, 1,000 nights spent reorganizing their entire existence around the possibility of female attention. And in doing so, they violated one of the oldest laws of nature, a law that Charles Darwin spent decades documenting in the wild, a law that doesn't care about your intentions or your feelings or how much effort you've put in. The law is simple, brutal, and utterly indifferent to fairness. Scarcity creates value, and abundance destroys it. Darwin understood this in ways that modern men have forgotten. When he sailed to the Galapagos and watched finches compete for mates, when he documented the elaborate displays of peacocks and the violent territorial battles of elephant seals, he wasn't just observing animal behavior, he was watching the mathematics of desire play out in real time. And what he discovered was that, across every species and environment, the same pattern emerged. The rarest resource commands the highest investment. The hardest to access male receives the most attention from females, not the kindest, not the most available, not the one who tries hardest to please, the rare one, the one whose attention and presence cannot be assumed. And here's what most men miss. Here's the part that quietly destroys them. You cannot negotiate desire through availability. You cannot earn attraction through constant presence. The moment you make yourself familiar, the moment you signal through your behavior that you're always accessible, always willing, always ready to drop everything for her attention, you don't become more valuable. You become invisible. Or worse, you become the man she's comfortable disrespecting. I work with men who've spent years doing everything they were told would work. They text back immediately. They're emotionally available. They communicate their feelings clearly. They make time. They show up consistently. They do the work. And they cannot understand why it never translates into respect, why the women they pursue seem perpetually lukewarm, always keeping one foot out the door, constantly scanning the room for someone else. These men think they're failing because they're not doing enough, so they do more. They become more available, more accommodating, more willing to ignore their own boundaries, and with each concession, they make themselves more common. With each eager response, they devalue their own attention, and the woman, operating on instincts shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure, begins to lose interest in a way she can't even articulate. This is the invisible pattern. A man starts by thinking that showing interest is how you build attraction, but what he's actually doing is flooding the market with his own currency, and in any marketplace, when supply exceeds demand, value collapses. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why this keeps happening to you and what it quietly destroys if you continue to ignore it. Darwin spent years in a world where survival and reproduction were inseparable, where every organism was locked in a relentless competition for resources, mates, and genetic continuity. He watched the natural world with a clarity that most people found disturbing, because what he saw wasn't fair, wasn't kind, and didn't care about anyone's feelings. He saw that nature rewards scarcity and punishes abundance. He saw that peacocks with the most elaborate tails weren't trying to be beautiful. They were advertising genetic fitness through costly displays. He saw that the stags who won mating rights weren't the ones who begged or pleaded, but the ones who controlled territory and could afford to fight. And when Darwin looked at human beings, he saw the same machinery operating beneath a thin layer of civilization and language. We like to think we're above biology, that our choices are rational and our attractions are based on personality and shared values. But Darwin knew better. He knew that beneath every romantic decision, Beneath every flutter of desire or withdrawal of interest, the same ancient algorithms are running. And one of the most powerful of those algorithms is this: perceived scarcity triggers pursuit, and perceived abundance triggers withdrawal. Here's the thesis that runs through everything that follows. The single idea that will explain more about your dating life than anything you've read in the last 5 years. A man who makes himself constantly available signals low reproductive value, and no amount of kindness, emotional labor, or genuine affection can override the instinctive withdrawal that follows. The moment you become common, you become forgettable. The moment you're always there, you become the man she takes for granted. And once that script is written, once that frame is set, no amount of effort will reverse it. You cannot logic your way out of a pattern that's governed by instinct. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. A man meets a woman he's genuinely interested in. The first few dates go well. There's chemistry, laughter, a sense of possibility. He starts texting her regularly. She responds, but not always immediately. He notices the delay and, instead of maintaining his own rhythm, starts adjusting. He texts more. He initiates more. He's the one suggesting plans, following up, and keeping the conversation alive. In his mind, he's showing interest, showing that he cares, showing that he's not playing games. But here's what she's registering at a level beneath conscious thought. This man is always available. His attention is cheap. He's more invested than she is. And the moment that imbalance becomes clear, something shifts. She starts responding less. She cancels plans more often. She's suddenly busy in ways she wasn't before. And he, operating from a place of scarcity, from a belief that opportunities like this don't come often, doubles down. He becomes more accommodating. He rearranges his schedule around hers. He stops making plans with his friends so he can keep his weekends open in case she's free. He starts softening his opinions, avoiding conflict, agreeing with things he doesn't really agree with because he's afraid that showing his edges will push her away. And with every concession, with every moment of over-availability, he's proving to her at a biological level that he's not the rare resource her instincts are searching for. He's proving that he's common. Darwin would have recognized this immediately. In the animal kingdom, males compete for access to females through displays of strength, territory, or resources. The males who are hardest to access, who control the most valuable territory, and who can afford to be selective, are the ones females pursue. It's not cruel. It's not manipulation. It's the unconscious recognition that scarcity signals quality, and quality is what ensures genetic survival. And the same pattern plays out in modern dating, dressed up in different languages but driven by the same ancient code. A man who's always available, whose time and attention cost nothing, is unconsciously categorized as low value. Not because he's a bad person, but because his behavior signals that he's not rare, not scarce, not in demand. And here's the part that hurts. The man believes he's losing because he's not doing enough. So he does more. He texts longer paragraphs. He asks more questions. He plans more elaborate dates. He listens more, opens up more, and becomes more emotionally available. And she drifts further. Because what he thinks is a connection, she experiences pressure. What he thinks is showing his feelings, she experiences as neediness. And underneath all of it, the same brutal Darwinian truth is humming. You've made yourself too available, and now your attention has no weight. I once spoke to a man who'd been dating a woman for 3 months. On paper, everything looked right. They had shared interests, good conversations, and physical chemistry. But he was always the one initiating, always the one planning, always the one checking in. And when I asked him how often she reached out first, he went quiet. Then he said something I've heard 100 times. I just don't want her to think I'm not interested. And there it was. The fear that drives the entire pattern. The fear that if he doesn't constantly signal interest, if he's not always available, she'll forget about him or move on. But what he didn't see, what most men in his position don't see, is that his constant availability was doing precisely what he feared. It was making him forgettable. It was teaching her that his attention was guaranteed, that she didn't have to invest, pursue, or wonder. And without that tension, without that uncertainty, attraction began to die. Darwin saw this in the wild over and over. The males who were hardest to access, who didn't chase, who occupied their own territory and let the females come to them, were the ones who secured mates, and the males who made themselves too available, who chased too eagerly, who signaled desperation through over-pursuit, were often left behind. It's not a moral judgment, it's just mathematics. Scarcity creates desire, abundance destroys it, and when you flood someone's world with your presence, when you're constantly texting, always available, always accommodating, you're not building attraction, you're killing it. Now let's go deeper. Let's look at how this pattern actually unfolds inside a man's mind, step by step, in a way that feels so gradual, he doesn't even notice it's happening. It starts with a small compromise. She doesn't text back for a few hours, and instead of continuing with his day, he checks his phone. Once, then twice, then 10 times. He tells himself it's no big deal, that he's just curious, but something has already shifted. His attention, which should be on his work, his mission, his own life, is now tethered to her response. He's waiting. And waiting is the first symptom of a man who's already begun to make himself familiar. Most men think this is harmless. They think it's just part of dating, part of being interested in someone. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. He's training his own nervous system to react to her signals. Every time he checks his phone and she hasn't responded, there's a micro hit of cortisol, a tiny spike of anxiety, and every time she finally does respond, there's a micro hit of dopamine, a little rush of relief. He's not in control anymore. He's being conditioned, like a lab animal, to orient his emotional state around her behavior. And the more this happens, the more his own center of gravity shifts away from himself and toward her. This is where the real damage begins. Because once a man starts measuring his worth by her responsiveness, once he starts believing that his value is determined by how much attention she gives him, he's already lost the game. He doesn't realize it yet, but he's abandoned his own frame, he's stepped into hers. And from that position, everything he does will feel like negotiation, like trying to earn something he believes he doesn't entirely deserve. He'll start over-explaining himself. He'll start apologizing for things he didn't do wrong. He'll begin softening his edges, hiding his opinions, performing a version of himself he thinks she'll find acceptable. And with every performance, he moves further away from the man he actually is, and closer to the man she cannot respect. Darwin understood that in nature, strength is demonstrated through indifference to outcome. The alpha stag doesn't beg the females to choose him. He occupies his territory, he shows his power through competition with other males, and he lets the females decide. If one leaves, another comes. Any single female's interest doesn't determine his value. It's defined by his ability to hold space and remain centered in his own power, regardless of external validation. And the same principle applies to men in modern dating. The moment you begin to collapse your sense of self-worth into her approval, the moment you need her to respond to feel okay, you've signaled that you're not the rare resource her biology is searching for. You've signaled that you're desperate, and desperation repels at a level deeper than conscious thought. Here's what this looks like in practice. The once confident man, who had his own rhythm and mission, begins to change his behavior. He stops going to the gym consistently because he's staying up late texting her. He cancels plans with his friends because she might be free. He stops working on the project that used to excite him because his attention is fragmented, constantly pulled toward his phone, waiting for her next message. And in his mind, he's telling himself that this is what relationships require, that this is what it means to prioritize someone. But what he's actually doing is dismantling the very structure that made him attractive in the first place. Because here's the truth that most men miss. She wasn't attracted to your availability. She was attracted to your completeness. She was drawn to the fact that you had a life, a mission, a sense of direction that existed independent of her. She was drawn to the tension created by your scarcity, by the fact that your time and attention were valuable because they were limited. And the moment you abandon that structure, the moment you make her the center of your existence, that tension collapses. You're no longer rare. You're no longer valuable. You're just there, always there. And always there is another way of saying common. I've watched this pattern destroy intelligent, accomplished, genuinely good men. They enter a relationship from a position of strength, but slowly, imperceptibly, they begin to negotiate away their boundaries. She comments on how much time he spends at the gym, and he cuts back. She expresses frustration that he's busy with work, and he starts leaving early. She's upset that he made plans with his friends without checking with her first, and he starts asking for permission. Each concession seems small in isolation. Each one seems like a reasonable compromise, but together they form a pattern of slow self-abandonment, and by the time he realizes what's happened, he's become a stranger in his own life. He's living in her frame, operating by her rules, seeking her approval for decisions that should be his alone, and she, whether she can articulate it or not, feels it. She feels the collapse, and she begins to pull away. The woman she later pursued looks similar on the surface. Similar job, similar interests, similar values. But the difference was invisible to anyone watching from the outside. The difference was this: the second man never made himself familiar. When she texted, he responded when he was ready, not immediately. When she suggested plans, he said yes if it fit his schedule, and no without apology if it didn't. When she tested him, pushed back, created minor conflicts to see if he'd fold, he didn't. He held his ground. Not through cruelty or manipulation, but through the simple fact that he had a life he wasn't willing to dismantle for anyone. And that scarcity, that lack of eager availability, triggered something in her that the first man's constant presence never could. It triggered pursuit. It triggered investment. It triggered the ancient recognition that this man's attention was rare and therefore valuable. This is Darwinian selection playing out in real time. The men who maintain their scarcity, who protect their time and attention, who refuse to collapse their sense of self into someone else's approval, are the ones who inspire investment. And the men who make themselves perpetually available, who signal through their behavior that they have nothing more important than this relationship, are the ones who get taken for granted. It's not personal. It's not even conscious. It's just biology, running its algorithms beneath the surface of every interaction, every text message, every cancelled plan. Now let's zoom out, because what's happening to individual men isn't just personal failure, it's part of a larger systemic shift, a cultural environment that's making scarcity almost impossible to maintain. We live in a world of infinite availability. Dating apps present men with the illusion of abundance, hundreds of profiles to swipe through, creating the sense that options are unlimited. Social media platforms are designed to keep you scrolling, checking, comparing, feeding the anxiety that you're missing out, that someone else is doing better, that if you're not constantly available and responsive, you'll be left behind. The entire digital architecture of modern dating is built to destroy scarcity, making every man feel he needs to compete by being more available, more responsive, more accommodating than the next guy. And the result is a race to the bottom. Men who would have once maintained their boundaries, who would have once had the instinct to protect their time and attention, are now operating in a state of constant, low-grade panic. They're afraid that if they don't respond immediately, she'll move on to someone else. They're worried that if they're not always available, always accommodating, they'll be replaced. And that fear is turning them into precisely the kind of men who get replaced, because in trying to compete through availability, they're making themselves familiar. They're flooding the market with their own currency. And she, sitting in the middle of this economy, is registering at an instinctive level that if everyone is available, no one is valuable. Darwin would have seen this as an environmental pressure. In any ecosystem, when a resource becomes too abundant, its value plummets. When food is everywhere, predators become lazy. When water is plentiful, animals don't develop the adaptations necessary for survival in drought. And when male attention is infinite, while every swipe produces another eager man ready to text back immediately, prepared to change his plans, prepared to orient his entire life around her schedule. Female selectivity doesn't decrease, it increases. Because abundance doesn't make choice easier, it makes it more challenging. It raises the threshold for what's considered valuable, and the men who are drowning in this environment are the ones still operating under the old assumption that more effort equals better results. But that's not how the system works anymore. More effort doesn't create more attraction when the effort itself is common. Texting back immediately doesn't make you special when every man is doing it. Being emotionally available doesn't make you rare when that's the baseline expectation. What creates value now, what's always created value according to Darwin's mathematics, is scarcity. And scarcity in a world of infinite availability requires something most men are terrified to do. It requires you to walk away from opportunities. It requires you to say no. It requires you to be willing to lose what you're afraid of losing, because the moment you're not willing to lose it, you've already lost. I work with men who cannot understand why they keep ending up in the same pattern. Different women, same outcome. They invest, they pursue, they make themselves available, and somewhere around the 3-month mark, she starts pulling back. And when I ask them what changed, they always say the same thing: nothing. They're still doing everything right, and still texting, still planning dates, still being emotionally present. And that's precisely the problem. They're still doing everything. They're still initiating everything. They're still the ones holding the relationship together. And she's learned, without anyone saying it explicitly, that she doesn't have to invest, pursue, or wonder because he's always there. This is the cost of ignoring Darwin's law. You don't just lose one woman, you lose your ability to inspire investment in any woman, because the pattern isn't about her. It's about you. It's about the fact that you've trained yourself to believe that your value comes from how much you give, how available you are, how willing you are to accommodate. And that belief is poison. It turns you into a man who negotiates for affection, who bargains for attention, who measures his worth by how much effort he's willing to expend. And women operating on instincts shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure can smell that from miles away, not consciously, but instinctively. And they withdraw. If a system demands your constant availability but offers no protection, no loyalty, no reciprocal investment, walking away isn't cowardice, it's wisdom. If you're always the one initiating, always the one planning, always the one checking in, you're not in a relationship. You're in a one-sided negotiation. And the longer you stay, the more you teach her that your attention costs nothing and therefore means nothing. She doesn't kill your purpose, she reflects its absence. And the moment you start living as if she is your purpose, you become the kind of man she cannot respect. So let's talk about what sovereignty actually looks like in this context. Not as a list of tactics, not as manipulation, but as a reclamation of the internal structure that made you valuable in the first place. It starts with a straightforward recognition. Your time is finite, and therefore it has inherent value. Every hour you spend waiting for her text, every evening you keep free just in case she's available, every plan you cancel because she might want to see you, is an hour you're not spending building the life that would make you rare. And rarity is the only currency that matters. Notice when you're about to check your phone for the 10th time in an hour. Notice the small spike of anxiety, the need to know she's responded. And instead of reaching for it, sit with that discomfort. Let it burn. Let yourself feel the gap between stimulus and response without immediately filling it. Because that gap, that moment of restraint, is where your power lives. Every time you resist the urge to check, every time you choose to return your attention to your work, your training, your mission, you're retraining your nervous system. You're teaching yourself that your emotional state doesn't depend on her responsiveness. And that internal shift, that reclamation of your own center, is what eventually translates into external scarcity. Stop pretending that being endlessly accommodating is the same thing as being strong. It's not. Accommodation without boundaries is just self-abandonment, wearing a polite mask. When she cancels plans at the last minute, don't immediately offer an alternative. Let there be space. Let her sit with the fact that your time isn't infinite, that you had other options, that this actually costs you something. You don't have to be angry, you don't have to be punished, but you also don't have to rush to fill the void with reassurance and another offer. Let the cancellation have weight. Let her feel the consequence of not valuing your time. Because if there's no consequence, if you always make it easy, you're teaching her that your time is worthless. Refuse to collapse your mission around anyone's approval. This is the central hinge that everything else turns on. If you have a project, a business, a training goal, something you're building that exists independent of any relationship, protect it like your life depends on it, because it does. Not your biological life, but the life that makes you feel like yourself, the life that makes you someone worth knowing. When she expresses frustration that you're busy, you're not always available, and you don't apologize or change your schedule, hold the line. Let her feel the tension of wanting access to you and not always getting it. That tension is attraction. That tension is what keeps her invested. And the moment you dissolve it by always saying yes, by always being free, you've removed the very thing that made you interesting. Allow her to react while you remain unmoved. This might be the hardest one because it requires you to tolerate her discomfort without rushing to fix it. She'll test you. She'll withdraw. She'll create minor conflicts. She'll express frustration that you're not as available as other men she's dated. And every fiber of your conditioning will scream at you to fix it, to explain, to reassure, to prove that you care. Don't. Let her feel what she's feeling. Let her sit with the fact that you're not going to negotiate away your boundaries to make her comfortable. Because what she's really testing isn't whether you care. She's testing whether you're rare. She's testing whether you're the kind of man who will collapse his frame to avoid conflict. And the moment you do, she has her answer. Begin to move as if your attention is the prize, not hers. This is the frame shift that changes everything. Most men assume that female attention is scarce and therefore valuable, while male attention is abundant and thus worthless. But that's only true if you make it true. If you're selective about who you invest in, if you're willing to walk away from women who don't reciprocate effort, if you protect your time like it's the rarest resource you have, then your attention becomes valuable. Not because you're pretending, not because you're playing games, but because it's actually true. You actually have other things to do. You actually have a life that doesn't revolve around her. And that reality, that lived scarcity, is what creates the gravitational pull that manipulation never can. These aren't tactics. They're symptoms of a man who understands his own value and refuses to negotiate it away for comfort. And the irony is this: when you start living this way, when you reclaim your scarcity and stop flooding the market with your attention, you don't just become more attractive to women. You become more appealing to yourself. You start feeling like your life belongs to you again. You start sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and moving with more purpose. Because you're no longer tethered to someone else's responses, no longer measuring your worth by how much attention you can extract from another person. You're back in your own frame, and from that place, everything else starts to rebuild. Now let's look at where this road actually leads. Let's map out two futures, both equally available to you right now, both determined by whether you take what you've just heard as information or as initiation. Because there's a difference. Information sits in your mind as something interesting you heard once. Initiation changes how you move through the world. If you ignore this, if you file it away as interesting but continue operating the same way you have been, here's what the next 5 years look like. You'll keep meeting women who seem interested at first, but the pattern will repeat. 3 months in, maybe 6 if you're lucky, the energy shifts. She starts pulling back, she cancels more, responds less, and seems perpetually distracted. And you'll do what you always do. You'll try harder. You'll text more thoughtfully, plan more elaborate dates, and become even more available. And it still won't work, because the problem isn't that you're not doing enough. The problem is that you're doing too much. And what you're doing is signaling that you're common. You'll start to notice a bitterness creeping in, a low-grade resentment toward women that you can't quite justify, but also can't shake. You'll catch yourself thinking things like, I did everything right, why didn't it work? And women don't actually want what they say they want, and both of those thoughts will feel true because, from your perspective, you did everything you were told to do. You were kind, available, and emotionally present, but you missed the deeper game. You missed the fact that attraction isn't built through effort, it's built through scarcity, and the men who understand that, the men who protect their time and attention like it's the most valuable currency they have, are the ones who get chosen while you're still wondering what you did wrong. Your life will get smaller, not in dramatic ways, but in the quiet accumulation of surrendered boundaries. You'll stop making plans with your friends because you're always waiting to see if she's free. You'll let your gym routine slip because you're staying up late texting. You'll abandon the project you were excited about because your attention is too fragmented to do deep work. And one day, maybe 5 years from now, you'll look around and realize you barely recognize your own life. You'll realize you've spent half a decade orbiting women who never fully chose you, accommodating schedules that never accommodated yours. Somewhere in that process, you lost the thread of who you were trying to become. But there's another path, the harder one, the lonelier one at first, the one that requires you to take what you've heard today, not as theory, but as a mirror, and to start making different decisions immediately. If you take this as an initiation, here's what the next 5 years look like. You'll start saying no more often, not to be difficult, not to play games, but because you'll realize that your time actually is finite and therefore sacred. You'll stop keeping your schedule open for people who don't value it. You'll stop texting back immediately, not because you're calculating, but because you'll be genuinely busy with things that matter to you. And you'll notice something strange. The less available you become, the more people want access to you. Not everyone. Some women will disappear the moment you stop being endlessly accommodating, and that's good. Those are the ones who were never going to respect you anyway. Let them go. You'll rebuild your mission. Whatever you were working on before you got distracted by the need for female validation, you'll return to it. Maybe it's a business, perhaps a creative project, or a physical goal that requires discipline and consistency. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that it's yours, that it exists independent of any relationship, and that you protect it with the same ferocity you used to reserve for romantic attention. And as you do that, as you pour energy back into your own structure, you'll start to feel something you haven't felt in years: self-respect. Not the loud, performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from knowing you're not negotiating your values for comfort. You'll become more selective, not more judgmental, but more discerning. You'll start noticing red flags earlier, and instead of ignoring them because you're afraid of being alone, you'll walk away. You'll realize that being alone is infinitely better than being in a relationship with someone who doesn't reciprocate your effort, who takes your time for granted, who treats your attention like it's worthless. And the more you honor that standard, the more you'll attract women who meet it. Not because you're playing hard to get, but because you've actually become hard to get. Your time costs something now. Your attention costs something. And women who are worth knowing can feel that. Your life will get quieter but stronger. You'll have fewer people in your orbit, but the ones who remain will be there because they chose to be, not because you convinced them. You'll stop performing, stop auditioning, stop trying to be the version of yourself you think others will approve of. And in that space, something unexpected will happen. You'll start to like yourself again. Not in a narcissistic way, but in the simple sense that when you look in the mirror, you'll recognize the man looking back. He's not perfect. He's not finished, but he's his own. And that's worth more than any validation someone else could give him. Here's the thesis one more time. Stripped down to its bones, when you make yourself constantly available, you teach people that your time costs nothing. And when your time costs nothing, neither do you. Darwin didn't invent this law. He just documented it. And it's been running beneath every interaction you've ever had, every relationship you've ever lost, every moment you've wondered why your effort didn't translate into respect. She doesn't kill your purpose. She reflects its absence. If you've built your life around her schedule, her moods, her approval, you didn't lose yourself to her. You lost yourself to your own lack of structure. And the way back isn't through doing more, trying harder, becoming even more available. The way back is through reclaiming your scarcity, through protecting your time like it's the rarest resource you have, because it is. If this hits something in you, if you feel the weight of recognition as you read it, share it with the men in your life who need it. Subscribe to this work and keep it alive for the ones still trying to negotiate desire through availability, still wondering why kindness alone isn't enough. This isn't content. It's a signal fire for men who are ready to stop performing and start building. Scarcity isn't cruelty. It's the only honest currency left in a world that's taught you to give yourself away for free.